Um, okay. So just wanted to talk to you guys about, why you shouldn't get a PhD in political science, because, my guess is that many of students watching this now or later in the recording are in many senses underrepresented, right? In social sciences and political science, or among people with graduate degrees. So just to give you a quick roadmap, first I'm gonna, tell you guys who I am. Then I'm gonna make a bunch of provocative statements on why you shouldn't get a PhD in political science. In this part of my talk, I would be not a motivating speaker, but a demotivating speaker of sorts. After that, I'm going to tell you guys why you actually should get a PhD in political science, because there are many reasons why that's a good thing to have. And then I'm going to give you some guidance on what to do if you eventually decide to get a PhD in political science. At any point in this talk, please feel free to interrupt me, ask any questions. I don't want to talk at you. I want to talk with you. Okay. So who am I? I'm a political science PhD candidate at University of Rochester. University of Rochester is primarily known for its game theory training, but also, we provide a very good training in quantitative methods, statistics, and other, fields. I also do have a master's in data science, so I'm a data scientist of sorts. So although I do know about game theory and of game theory, and I implement some of the methods, I primarily do work with data. And most importantly, I am a grade A Dushnila. So I will be giving you a lot of details and specifics, and I hope you're okay with that. My research primarily focuses on censorship in autocracies. And in my dissertation, I look at the crudest way of censoring people on the internet, which is an internet outage, which is something that is not unfamiliar to us and to you, because as we all remember, in Kazakhstan in January, when mass protests were hijacked by coup attempters, the government decided to shut down the internet, right? And we can clearly see that in the data. So here you could see a graph of Google activity from Kazakhstan, right? And you can see that from January 5th to January 10th, there is a very clear dip, right? So in my dissertation, what I do, I scrape these types of data on internet activity from various countries. I then measure anomalies in the data, and then I flag them like, hey, I think this was an outage, this was not an outage, and so on. My primary argument is that internet outages are done by incompetent autocrats, meaning that autocrats that do not have any other more complicated or more sophisticated methods of censoring. Another example would be Belarus, when in 2020, after Lukashenko has cheated on his elections, people took it to the streets. And again, the government responded with shutting down the internet. And we can clearly see that, Google activity has decreased in those days. At the same time, people started using Tor browser, which allowed to circumvent some of these outages. So cross-referencing these types of data, I flag outages and I tell people like, hey, this was an outage. This is when autocrat turned off the internet. And, then based on these data, I make my argument. How are we feeling so far? Feeling good?
Yeah, pretty good.
Okay, cool. So now that you know who I am, I hope I have some credibility in what I'm about to tell you next, okay? So to understand why you shouldn't get a PhD in political science, you need to understand what tenure is, okay? The reason why I want to talk about it is because when I was your age, when I was, Nazarbayev University, I didn't know what tenure was, okay? So tenure is something that academics get, right? And tenured professors cannot be fired, okay? Why is it needed? It's an awesome thing because it gives professors academic freedom, right? Because now that their position is secured for life, no one can tell them like, hey, you need to do this research or do that research. And no one can come in and tell them like, hey, you shouldn't say this or you shouldn't say that. So tenure was intended as an, amazing thing. And it's a great thing, right? So what academics want to do when they start their career, right? They want to do as much research, publish as much as possible to then get tenure and then, get that freedom and that independence. Okay, so tenure is the end game, right? However, it also has some downsides. In the 90s, I believe, right, there was an uncapping in American academia, right? And what that means is before that point in time, people had to retire at a certain age, right? So like once you hit 65, you had to leave academia, you had to retire and so on and so forth. However, that regulation was lifted. And what happened? Well, what happened was people would stay at the department for longer. They would not retire, right? And as we could see on this graph, age of the faculty has drastically increased, right? So like prior to 1994, people's median age was around like 40, but now it's around like 50 or 60. Yes. Here we can also see that the average age of the faculty also increased, right? So the average the proportion of faculty over 70 has increased dramatically after the uncapping thing, right? So why is it a bad thing? It's a bad thing because it means that there is less social mobility now in academia, right? So now younger faculty members cannot get promoted as fast because there are fewer positions, right? Not only that, but also there are fewer open positions. So people get their PhDs in political science, but they cannot get a tenure track position. So it's harder for them to become professors because people are not retiring and there are very few positions. So the supply of the talent does not match the demand, okay? So if you want to do your PhD in political science in the hope that one day you will become a professor, right? That there is a very solid chance that it may not happen, right? Not because you're not talented, not because you're not working hard enough, but because of this system, okay? Some of this may or may not apply to European markets, but most of this still holds for American markets. Okay, so that's reason one. Another reason is that academia is not a meritocracy, okay? You may have a feeling that, academia is an awesome place, you will become a professor and there's like no sexism or racism and, everyone is super woke. That's not true, okay? So if you take a look at this graph, you could see that certain groups are overrepresented or underrepresented in certain disciplines, right? So for instance, we would primarily be interested in Asian men and women because, I'm guessing that's our audience primarily today, right? So all of the green cells are underrepresented groups and all of the red cells are overrepresented groups. So if you take a look at Asian men and women, in humanities, both of these groups are underrepresented somewhat, right? And in social sciences, Asian women are underrepresented too, right? How was that measured? This was measured by, looking at the number of citations that people get and, number of things that people publish, right? So it is kind of hard for, Asian men and women to publish in political science and social sciences in general, okay? Somewhat. Again, these are average statistics. Does not mean that it will apply to you at an individual level, but this is the overall trend, okay? So again, you will get a PhD in political science. Does it mean that it will be easy? Probably not. Not because you are not good enough, not because you're not working hard enough, but because, there are certain structural issues, based on sexism and racism, right? Again, it's not a meritocracy, okay? So if you have those pink glasses, take them off now, okay? I hope you're not too demotivated yet because we have more, okay? Another reason is another reason why you shouldn't get a PhD in political science is because that sexism is not only present in the department in many senses, but also outside the department, right? So as a researcher, you don't only work in the department, you don't only interact with academics, right? You also do sometimes field research, right? And it's harder for women researchers to conduct that research because it's not always as safe for them to conduct field research, right? And some of these things are not addressed. If you take a look at this, this was published in 2022. So yes, there are positive trends. People talk about these things, but it's we have a long way to go. Not finally, another thing. That's your so as an academic, right? You will be doing research, but you also will be teaching, right? And the way people evaluate, the way students evaluate you is also not extremely always fair, right? So on average, we tend to see that women instructors tend to get lower scores than men instructors, right? That's especially true for larger courses, because when it comes to smaller courses, when it comes to smaller classes, when you have like 20 students as opposed to 120, you will get to connect with students and have some chatter, and probably smaller classes are somewhat specific, right? So again, you will be facing some of these inequalities, not only in the sense of your research work, but also in your in the dimension of your teaching work. Okay, so it's omnipresent. Okay, and that's not only true for gender, also true for race. Minorities tend to get lower teaching evaluations than non-minorities. Another thing is that many of our students, I'm guessing many of Nazarbayev University alumni, future alumni, will be what's known as first generation student, which means that your parents were probably not professors. And if they were, awesome, good for you, I'm super happy for you, but probably they were not. And if they were professors, they probably were not professors in American universities. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because there is a thing called a hidden curriculum. Okay, and what's a hidden curriculum? So it's a thing like it's norms and cultures of how people interact in the political science department or among political scientists. Okay, so like not everything is straightforward or explained to you. So you will have to be aware of that. And part of the reason why I'm talking about this is because I want you guys to take a look at some of the parts of this hidden curriculum. Okay, I'm trying to like level up the field for you guys a little bit. Okay, any questions so far? Are we doing okay? Anyone quitting school just yet? No, everyone with us? Okay. Finally, PhD, like doing a PhD in any discipline, not just political science, it's very tolling when it comes to mental health, right? And according to this research, in political science specifically, about 30% of respondents, they develop symptoms consistent with depression, and 32% have anxiety, right? Not only that, many of these students are not receiving any treatment, okay? And that's a huge issue. So you'll have to, prepare yourself for these challenges as well. Almost 16% of students have reported some suicidal thoughts, right, in the past 2 weeks. That's alarmingly high. That's like 1 in 6 people. So that just goes to show you that, political science PhD programs do have issues. Yes, and like I said, anxiety and depression are prevalent, right? Well then, why should you get a PhD in political science, right? If it's so bad, if it's so tolling, and if it's so unequal and so bad, what am I doing here, right? And why are all of these people doing their PhDs? And why should you do it in the first place, right? Because I'm not an idiot, right? Well, there are several very good reasons. First, and primarily, it's a very good social lift and a significant social boost, right? So I know that Nazarbayev University, in a certain sense, was intended as a meritocratic institution, right? It was supposed to lift up, bright and young people of Kazakhstan, and give them good education, right? So if you want to continue that trend, getting a PhD in political science is an amazing thing. Okay, Yes, you may not get an academic job, but that's all right because just having a degree is already great. Okay, so at no point do I want you to feel discouraged from applying. I actually think that you should probably try and get a PhD in political science and apply to a school because it will give you an amazing boost. And importantly, for many first generation students like yourselves and like me, getting funding at a PhD program may be your first real and stable paycheck. So yeah, you should probably do it, right? Just beware of all of the negative sides of those programs. Another thing is that once you get a PhD, right, you will probably be more hireable on the job market, not only in academia, but also outside of academia, right? So like you will, especially with political science, if you get a lot of quantitative training, you will be in very high demand, in data science fields. Facebook will hire you, Google will hire you, those kind of places. Okay. Not only that, once you get into a PhD program, you can always leave once you get your master's. Okay, so like your contract would tell you like, hey, stay here for 5 years, complete your PhD and leave. But you could complete your master's in 2 years and quit after that, and no one's going to judge you, right? Another reason is why you should get a PhD in political science is because all of those things that I told you about, problems in the academia, it doesn't mean that they do not exist in the industry. It doesn't mean that they do not exist in private sector. If anything, in many cases, they're probably much, much worse. Okay, so that alone should not discourage you. Okay. And finally, and a reason that I find, I guess, a bit more personal is because there are too few PhD holders from Kazakhstan. Okay, so and that really truly matters. For instance, when our country saw the events in January, there were very few analysts from Kazakhstan, giving their assessment of the situation in the West and to the world in general, right? We have like a couple of dozen amazing, political scientists from Kazakhstan, amazing researchers, right? But it's not enough. Okay, so if we want our stories to be heard, and if we want, our stories to matter, it's best if we get in there and get some of that representation. Okay, any questions so far? I see a bunch of squares with letters and profile pictures. Is any of this helpful? Any of this interesting? Any of this not helpful? Any questions so far? Everything is crystal clear?
Yeah, I wanted to ask something.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I know that before going to PhD, you have to thoroughly understand where you are going or whether you are ready, right? And because, for example, in the US, especially, funding for PhD is much higher than, for example, for master's. Many people suggest that you should go for a PhD and just leave after you take your master's. Like as you said, no one's going to judge you. Do you think that after going to PhD right after undergraduate, for example, instead of like applying to classical MA program, is okay? Because I mean, and the second part is, what if is it okay that people, for example, want to pursue PhD not because they necessarily want to be in academia for a long time or go to teach, but because they want to increase their expertise? And if increasing your expertise is the main goal, is there any other way of doing that without having a PhD? In data science and political science specifically.
Yeah, no, these are awesome questions. So I started doing my PhD right out the gate, right? So I got my bachelor's degree and I went into PhD program. So I wouldn't know much about getting some other experience before getting into a PhD program. I do know of people that had their master's degrees before getting into a PhD program. And I think in many senses, it's very useful, right? Because you get some exposure to research and, you get some exposure to how the kitchen works, right? In a sense. So if you get funding for your master's, by all means, go for it. I say go for it, right? It's just, I do realize that, getting funding for master's is much, much harder. My advice would be just, be aware of the funding. When it comes to reasons for getting a PhD, there is no good or bad reason, right? You may have passion for research, you may have passion for academia, you may not, and it's totally fine, right? The only, I guess, issue with that I would have is, whether you want to signal that in your cover letter when you apply to a PhD program, right? You don't want to tell them like, hey, I'm going to apply, but actually I don't want to become a professor, okay? Just in general, avoid those kinds of phrasings, okay? Keep those reasons to yourself, okay? In your cover letter, primarily what you want to signal to them is like, I am super enthusiastic, I want to do research, I want to get that PhD. Not only that, but I'm also super prepared, okay? I know what I'm doing, get me in there, okay? But your personal reasons, they may be whatever they are, right? Getting expertise in certain things and becoming a researcher, I think there are many avenues for that, right? There are many independent journalists who do high quality research work, right? If it's not academic work, it doesn't mean that it's bad research work, right? I mean, look at Bellingcat; they do amazing stuff, right? So I see no reason why would anyone say like, hey, you need to have PhD to conduct high quality research? And I think in the age of internet, we have a lot of opportunity to gain knowledge and get that expertise without academic training. But like I said, you want to get that PhD not only because you have passion for research, but also because it gives you that social boost, right? It's a huge opportunity for many people. Yeah, thanks for those questions. May I continue? I have just a couple more slides, okay? I'm almost done. Okay. Now, so how do you, you probably made up your mind, you want to apply to a PhD in political science program, right? So there are several things you need to, consider. First, you need to consider how you choose your school, okay? And many students, they just want to apply to an Ivy League, and that's it, right? People just want to get their PhDs from Harvard and Yale and UPenn and all those amazing places, right? Well, I'm here to tell you, Ivy Leagues are not everything, okay? There are many amazing schools that are not Ivy League, but they still give you amazing training. What you actually want, you want to work with people in the department. And there are two main things that matter. First, you want your research interests aligned with the research interests of people in that department. If you want to do comparative politics, you want to find a department that has good comparativists. If you want to do IR, you want to find a department that does good IR. Not only that, you also want people who have published recently, okay? There are many amazing senior academics, but they haven't published in a while, right? And they probably wouldn't start publishing once you get in. And publishing matters because that's your ultimate product, okay? And in addition to that, you don't just want to find an amazing researcher, right? You also want to find someone who cares about you. And that's really hard to understand, right? You actually need to interact with that person to see what kind of person they are, right? I mean, there could be this academic whose research interests are perfectly aligned with yours. They are an amazing, super productive researcher, right? They have 20 publications last 2 years. But the thing is, you also want them to care about you. You want them to have time for you and invest into you and train you, right? If another person was whose research interests were not as close to yours, but if they cared about you, you probably should go for that, okay? And it's very hard to gauge these things. And I'll give an advice on how to, identify those kinds of people. Okay. Another thing when looking at your schools is you want to know what the completion rate is and what the duration of the program is. Okay. So, school X could produce amazing researchers, right? But you also want to see like how many of the people that entered the program actually completed it, right? If the completion rate is only 50% or like 30%, you don't want to go there, right? Because obviously something is very wrong in that department, because that means that many people are dropping out and only the toughest or the best are, stay. And you also want to know, what the average duration of the program is, because when PhDs give you funding, they give you funding for 5 years, right? Usually. But if the average, length or like average number of years that you need to complete PhD is like 7 or 8, you probably don't want to go there either, right? Because something's wrong, right? They are not giving enough funding and people are staying way too long, right? Another thing that you may want to consider is diversity. How diverse is the department, right? Both in terms of gender and race, right? Like, if you're a woman, would you be comfortable working in a department where, only a quarter of people are women, right? Or if you're an ethnic minority or like an international student, would you be comfortable with that, right? And if you are, awesome, more power to you, go for it. But, just don't forget about those things. And also you'll need to think of cost of living, right? Because I don't know, I never applied to Harvard, I don't think. But if Harvard tells you like, hey, your stipend here is going to be like $45,000 per year, right? I mean, it sounds awesome, but it's also in Boston, right? Which is much more expensive than, say, Rochester. And in Rochester, they'll pay you like, I don't know, $28,000, but you live like a king here because everything is so cheap, right? So you may want to consider those things as well. You also may want to consider whether that university that you're applying to has a labor union, for example, right? Because if there is labor union for graduate students, you will be more protected. You will have higher pay, and and in general, you will have more fair labor conditions. Okay, so you may want to be mindful of those things as well. And finally, when applying to schools and PhDs is very costly, actually, right? It's like one application is like what, $160, $160. And then GRE is like what, another 160 or more. And then you need to pay for visa. And then you need to pay for the, meeting with the counselor or whatnot, right? So you may want to take into consideration how much do application fees, how high are the application fees, right? There are also many schools that do not have any application fees, right? Like Vanderbilt, I believe, doesn't have any application fees. We have a question in the chat, right? Yeah. So during the PhD, do students receive some financial assistance, like stipend in the US? Yes. So for the most part, all of the PhD programs, to my knowledge, provide funding. Not all of them, but many of them provide funding, right? And when, if you are given an offer from a PhD program, they will tell you like, hey, tuition is covered, and this is the stipend that you will be receiving, right? And that's a very good question. That's a very valid question. You need to be mindful of that. Some places may give you an offer without a stipend or without even tuition. And unless you're super rich, I'd say don't do that. Just go to a place where they pay you. And at the same time, also look at your contract, because your contract may say like, hey, we'll pay you well, but at the same time, we're going to work you really hard. You're going to be like TAing like 2 or 3 courses a semester. And you don't want to do that because then you wouldn't have as much time for your dissertation and for your research. So very carefully read your contract, and also be mindful of things like, will they be increasing your pay every year or not? Right? Because many programs, they don't do that. They just fix your pay at a certain rate, and then next year they pay you the same thing. But inflation happens, right? And you're basically getting your pay cut every year. So be mindful of all of these things, research your schools, and try and find answers to these questions. Okay, again, Ivy League is not everything. Many major political scientists are not everything. I know you want to work with like, Bruce Buena de Mesquita and Alistair Smith. You want to work like, with Semiglu and Robinson or like Fioron. They're probably not going to work with you. Okay. However, they have produced many amazing researchers, right? And you may just want to see who they have taught, right? Who they have trained. And those people are younger, they're ambitious, and they're very passionate. And you may want to work with them, right? Another question in the chat. Can you negotiate your pay? Yes, you absolutely can negotiate your pay, but you need to be very careful, right? Because if you only have one offer from, I don't know, Iowa State, and that's all you have, it's very hard to negotiate, right? However, if you do have 2 or 3 offers, you can definitely negotiate. But again, you have to be very careful. You don't want to come off as too strong, and you always want advice. So go talk to your professors and be like, hey, I want to negotiate. And you can negotiate different things, right? For instance, you could increase your pay. You could say like, hey, I'll be doing all of these things that are in the contract, but you will pay me more. Or you can just tell them like, hey, you will not increase or decrease my pay, but I will work less. Why should you listen to me? Well, because I have another offer, and if you don't follow, I'll just take this other offer. Obviously, you tell them it like this. You say it in a much nicer way, but you most definitely can negotiate. And thanks for bringing that up, because I didn't know that. I just got contracts and I was like, okay, well, that's it. What they said stays, and that's the law. But it most definitely is not. Okay, you can totally negotiate, and you should negotiate. But again, just talk to your professors, someone who's experienced in these things, and then negotiate. Okay. Yes. So did I apply to PhD right after my NU graduation, not to Master's in Science? Yes. So I applied to many PhD programs in my 4th year, I believe, when I was in Nazarbayev University, like fall semester. Why did I apply in fall? Because most of the deadlines for schools are in December and January. And usually the better schools have their deadline earlier. So yeah, I applied right out of my bachelor's. Okay, now where could you find all of this information, right? I told you like, hey, you need to find this information, right? And you need to know these things. Well, where could you get this? You could Google, right? And you could use like collegefactual.com, and it will tell you like, for instance, Yale doctorate student diversity for political science. We have 42% of them are women, 23% are racial and ethnic minorities. Well, this is a lot of bull, right? Why? Because obviously this statistic does not match this statistic. So something is wrong. Because why? Because this website, they tried their best of assessing the diversity in the department, but they couldn't. It's very hard. Much of that information is hidden or is very hard to assess, right? Still, I think this could be a good starting point, right? You may want to check this website out and take a look at many different programs and see, at least their diversity stats. This site does not provide like, completion rates or duration of the program, but, it gives you something. And it also tells you like, what the ethnic diversity is, and you can take a look at, white students, international students, and so on. And you may want to ask yourself like, which of these groups matters to you most? Which of these groups do you associate yourself most with? Are you an international student or an Asian student, right? But primarily where you get this information is talking to grad students. Okay, so you can definitely conduct English is such a hard language. Informational interviews. So what you do, you find some schools, right, that like say top 50 best political science schools, right? Then you go to their websites, and then you identify graduate students that work there, okay? And then you shoot them cold emails, okay? You tell them like, hey, I'm such and such. I am from like Kazakhstan. I'm from Nazarbayev University. I'm really interested in, applying to your school. Hey, could you like, give me an answer to a couple of these questions? if you have any time, right? And many of them will not respond, but many of them will too. Okay, why? Because academics like to talk. They like hearing themselves talk. Okay, and many of the grad students appreciate any validation that they could get. Okay, so aim for like, students who are later in their program, like me, for example. I'm in my 6th year, right? And I'm like, holy shit, someone wanted to listen to what I have to say. So here I am. Okay, so shoot emails to those grad students and ask them like, hey, what's the completion rate? What are the, what's the pay like? What's the city like, right? What are the costs of living? Stuff like that. And you also want to ask questions like, how do you commute to work, and what's the general vibe there, right? So yeah, these websites again are a good starting point, but best information would come from the department and from those graduate students. Okay, just be nice though. Okay. Yeah. Now, so suppose you identified the schools that you want to apply to. You have like 10 or 12 best schools. You got your money for application fees, right? What do? Well, some of the courses that you really may want to take are math courses. Okay, so you may want to take like calculus 1, 2, 3, linear algebra, econometrics, data analysis 2. If you have data science, machine learning, awesome. Real analysis, you can take that. I never took it, and I'm fine. Okay. Why do you want to take these courses? The reason why is because you want to send a signal to those departments that you know something about math. Because general trend in political science and in many social sciences right now is that everything is getting quantified. Okay, so is that a good thing or a bad thing is a different question. But if you want to get in, you want to signal to them like, hey, I do know math, and I do know at least the basics of data analysis. Okay, so these would be very important courses to take. If anything, political science courses may not even matter for many departments. That's not true for everyone, but math is very important. So if you do have a chance, take these courses, okay? And try to do very well at them. And if you don't do well at them, that's fine. But you can mention in your like CV or your resume, like, hey, I have training in this and that. And that's also a good signal to the hiring committee. Then you need to knock your GRE out of the park. Okay, it's not fair. It puts many people at a disadvantage, but that's the game. Okay, so GREs are very hard, and they favor only certain types of people and people from certain classes. But we need to really work hard on them. Okay, and start as early as possible. Just get a bunch of those practice books and practice math and learn as many words as possible. Okay, you may think that you know English. No, you don't. Okay, English is an infinite language. It is unfair. It's not just, but again, that's the game. And unfortunately we just have to deal with it. Okay. Another thing that you could do for your application package to stand out, you could do research assistantship at Nazarbayev University, right? And you want to do something meaningful, right? Just go to your professors and tell them like, hey, do you need a research assistant, right? And you don't want to just like clean data for them or like do literature review. You also want to kind of like shadow them. You want to know how do they conduct research, right? You want to learn something from them, okay? And also, this would also give you an opportunity to ask for a recommendation letter, okay? Especially if you do this like in your 2nd or 3rd year of your bachelor's degree, may be very helpful, okay? Even in your 4th year, actually. So, or like in the summer, over the summer, just keep asking like, hey, do they have any research assistantship opportunities, okay? And you may even get a publication out of it. Who knows, right? So try and, shadow your professors, do some meaningful work, and keep talking to them. And when you're asking for recommendation letters, ask someone who you trust. Okay, rarely, it doesn't happen often, but in some very rare instances, Professors may agree to write you a recommendation, but they may write you a bad recommendation. Okay, and you don't want that. You don't want that to happen. So you ask someone who you trust, and you ask them to write you a good recommendation, and there's nothing wrong with that. And also, be mindful of the following: when you apply, there is an option like to view your recommendation letter after it was submitted or not. Never check that option. Okay, you don't want to know what was inside of that recommendation letter. Okay, and if you do that, that's a bad signal. Okay, again, all of your entire application package is just a huge signal. Okay, that's it. Because like when the hiring committee looks at all of these resumes and CVs and GRE results, they're doing their decisions very fast. Okay, because they don't want to do it. Okay, usually how it happens, the department chooses 3 people and tells them like, hey, look at these 200 applications and get it done by noon or by Friday. And begrudgingly, these 3 people cram themselves into a single room, and they want to be done with it as soon as possible. Okay, so they have to make decisions very snappy. So you don't want to confuse them in any of your applications, right? And you want to stand down. Okay. Finally, in your application, in your resume, you may want to tell people like, I do know some programming, right? Especially LaTeX, which is just a tool that helps you format your writing. So for instance, this whole presentation was made in LaTeX. Okay. You also may want to mention STATA and R, right? And I know that programming is hard for some people, and that's fine. But you may want to invest like 1 or 2 weeks into just trying things out. And try and play with R. Just make a simple graph. Okay. Making a graph will give you some sense of control, and you can do something creative and something cool with it. And if you're way too afraid of LaTeX, just go to overleaf.com, create an account. They have like templates and everything, and start there. Okay, you don't need to be a super duper specialist in these things. Okay, but again, you just want to signal to the hiring committee, hey, I know what I'm doing. I know that you guys are using these things in academia, and I already know how to do them. So you don't need to worry about me too much once I get in. Okay. Yeah. And your cover letter, you need to be super duper excited to do research in your cover letter, and you have to identify what kind of research you want to do and which people do you want to work with. Okay. And again, you may want to say like, oh, I want to work with BDM and Alistair Smith. But if you tell them something more specific, if you mention a researcher that published more recently, for example, right, that would also give them a very good signal that, hey, this guy or this person knows what they're doing. This person knows what they're talking about, right? And let's give them an offer. Okay, so you got in, right? What do you do? Once you get in into a PhD program, your research has to be your top priority, right? And what does that mean? That means that you need to constantly work on generating ideas, publishing papers, and co-authoring. Okay. This also means that you should never ever teach. It's a bad thing to say. I do personally love teaching. I think that teaching is extremely rewarding. However, if you want to take a shot at becoming like a professor or an academic, teaching does not matter to people as much as your research does. Okay, so you may want to teach as little as possible. I do teach a lot because that's what I like. I do like, engaging with students. And if you do like it too, more power to you. Okay. And like I said, your priority must be generating ideas and networking with people. Okay. To get in, you need all of those high GRE scores and math training and all that. But once you're in, that matters way less than being creative and generating new ideas for research and just talking to people. Okay. Learn from my mistakes, because when I got into grad school, my research was never my priority. My training was, or my teaching was. and I didn't generate as many ideas, and I didn't network as much. Okay. So learn from my mistakes and don't do those things. Do the opposite. Okay. Keep talking to people, keep generating ideas, keep thinking of interesting research questions and creative ways of answering them. Okay. That could be conducting like an interesting experiment, or finding an interesting data set, or creating an interesting data set. Finally, give as many talks as possible. And when I say give as many talks as possible, I mean, like, both inside your department and outside of your department. Go to conferences, however small they are. This isn't helpful. This will help you, to polish your ideas, because, if only your department sees your paper, that's like what, 30 perspectives, 50 perspectives. But if you give talks to many other people, that's like 200 and 250 perspectives, or thousands even, maybe, right? And that will polish your research, because people will give you comments and ideas. Not only that, you will also gain some buzz on your research, right? People wouldn't be saying like, hey, who's that AIDA person, right? They'll be like, oh, AIDA, it's the global networks person. And I'm like, oh, right. I do remember her from this and that, right? And you want that to happen, right? You want your name to be familiar to people. And that's one way to do it. You may not get into a PhD program, right? And that's fine. And it's easy for me to say, because I already got in, and I can't just sit here and talk all day how bad or how amazing PhD programs are. But if you get a rejection, my main message to you would be that it says more about them than it does say about you. Okay. If you got a rejection, doesn't mean that you're not good enough, doesn't mean that you didn't work hard enough, doesn't mean that you're not smart enough. Trust me, I've seen many rather dim people with PhDs, or people getting PhDs. Okay, so if anything, it probably says more about the department that rejected you than you. Okay, because again, like I said, these decisions are made very fast. No one actually wants to look at all of these applications, so don't worry about it. Okay, it's not the end of the world. Okay, there's many different things, and just like we discussed briefly just now, right? You can do high quality research without academic training. You can still do masters. You can still become an amazing researcher. And, there are many career avenues for you out there. Okay. This is not the way. This is just a way. Yeah. Like I said, you still can do research. So that pretty much concludes my slide deck. The floor is wide open for any and all of your questions. Please have at it. And thank you again.
Thank you a lot, Agabek, for your presentation. That was very well informed, and so much practical and useful information. I think everybody liked it. However, as a moderator of this talks, I have a couple of questions for you prepared.
Yeah, of course.
I think many people would be curious about your NU experience. I know, so Agabek graduated NU in 2016, which is quite early, right? It's an early period of like NU life. But still, how do you think your studies at NU shaped your academic interest and shaped you as a person? Like, what do you value the most about your NU experience? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So yeah, no, you're right. 2016, I think we were the second generation alumni, right? I think what I valued the most were like the professors and my fellow students. Because for an outsider may think like, hey, Nazarbayev University, it's only like 6 years old. What the hell do they know about research? What the hell do they know about political science? Turns out they do know quite a lot, actually. And many of our professors, even though it's a very small department, they provide high quality training. And the training that they provide is very informed. It's up to date. And I guess I appreciated that a lot. I also, really am thankful that that small department truly cared about their students. So, our professors, they would actually care about us, and they would help us out, and they would navigate, our future career. And I appreciated that. But again, I guess my perspective is somewhat biased, because I cared a lot too, when it comes to just life in Nazarbayev University, I didn't participate in that many student clubs, I don't think. I maybe have been a member of a couple. And if you're curious whether that was at all useful when applying to PhD programs, I don't think it was. But it was extremely, I think it's very important still to, participate in those clubs to, to gain friends. You do want to develop a support network, and friends that you make now at university will probably be your long life friends. So, do not disregard that, and, do not devalue those networks, I guess I would say. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, I think so. And by the way, now actually among School of Science and Humanities, political science PSIR major is actually the most popular one, I think. Right?
Oh, cool.
A lot of students apply. So also you are having a minor in economics and during your bachelor's degree. Does your knowledge of economics help during your studies at doing PhD in political science?
Just the tiniest bit. So the reason why my economics training is useful from time to time is because the University of Rochester Political Science Department does a lot of game theory, and some of the concepts that we covered in our game theory training came from economics, and I was not unfamiliar with them, and that was helpful. But other than that, I'd say the usefulness of having a minor is not appreciated as much, probably. But again, it's all about signals, right? If your resume says, hey, you have minor in economics, that again tells something to the hiring committee, and it tells something to people like, hey, this person knows math and econ and whatnot, right? And you may want to do double major if you have no life. So
yeah, it's quite hard pill to swallow, to realize that you're working for years doing something, and that will be just a pure signal for someone, just a clue point in the CV. Just came into realization of your words.
I mean, yes, sure. It will become a signal at that particular point, right?
Yeah.
But in the grand scheme of things, your training is not just that, right? It's a signal, but only in that particular context. In general, you are valued, and you are, want to be hired because of the skills that you gain. Okay,
right.
Not necessarily your knowledge, but your skills. Okay, so because you do a lot of political science, you probably know statistics, you do know how to analyze data, you do know how to critically think about things. And now that since you work at Nazarbayev University and you study at Nazarbayev University, you have you have the ability to communicate with many different cultures, for instance, right? And navigate this more and more globalizing world. So yes, your education is a signal, right? For sure, but only at that particular specific point. Do not devalue your education. It's super important. Your skills are super important.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so also you have a quite fruitful experience as a teaching assistant for various professors, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us, how did you start your journey in teaching? It could be also great if you share what exact work you were doing while being a teacher for those who are unfamiliar with it.
Yeah. So when you get your contract for PhD, right, offer, you will be required to be a teaching assistant, right?
Unless you want to be poor.
Yeah. Or I don't know. I think majority of programs would require you to be a teaching assistant, right? So that's how I started my teaching assistant journey. It wasn't out of choice. It was out of my obligation. As a teaching assistant, what I do depends really on the type of on the professor and the type of class, right? So for instance, when I was assisting for Intro to Comparative Politics, right, I would weekly, hold weekly discussions with students. So we have a small group of 20 to 25 people, and we would discuss readings, right? And people would ask questions, I would ask questions them, and so on and so forth, right? And at the same time, I would have to assess hey, how well are they participating? Did they do the readings? Are they asking intellectually challenging questions? That type of stuff. And much of your work as a teaching assistant is just grading. Okay, you will be grading papers, you'll be grading exams, because professors don't want to do that. They have much more important things to do, apparently. When I was a teaching assistant for data analysis classes or statistics classes, on top of grading, I would also hold like weekly labs. So I would teach students how to program. I would solve like statistical problems with them, and primarily it was that. So basically, as a teaching assistant, in many cases you are just becoming like a tiny professor, and mostly grader. So that's what you do, and I do like it. Not many people do, but I do. So.
Yeah, I mean, the graphs that you were showing are oddly satisfying, I would say. And so speaking of programming languages, can you give some advice for specifically political science students and people who do social science who want to learn these languages but could not succeed in them, are demotivated to learn them, it's super hard, and feels like you only know the easy stuff and you actually don't know the language? Applies to art, basically.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, well, probably the hardest thing is just to start programming and not be afraid of making mistakes, right? So like, suppose you mess something up in R or like in our studio, your computer's not going to crash, right? It's not going to explode. Worst thing that's going to happen is going to yell at you, just give you like an error in red letters, but that's it. So I think just try and overcome your fear. And if you are concerned that you can only do easy stuff, yeah, the answer is obvious. Try to do something harder. Find a challenge, and try doing that. I would also recommend some books. First one that comes to mind is R Inferno. It's a free book. It should be out there. You can just follow the book and do practice exercises. Another one is, I think it's called ANOVA in R, but I'm not quite sure. So you may want to check out those textbooks. Yeah, and just do that. For LaTeX, which is not strictly speaking a programming language, but you may want to use Overleaf because, like I said, they do have good tutorials and they have good templates, and you just want to do that. Yeah, and with R, most of your skill actually isn't remembering commands, it's Googling. You do need to know how to Google a problem, how to solve it, that type of stuff. Yeah. So, yeah.
And now let's focus on your research. So your research focuses in internet censorship and authoritarian regimes, as you said, right? Can you tell us more on how did you identify your research focus, your research area of interest, let's say, and what results did it give? I mean, whatever you are allowed to say at this point. And also the second probably sub-question will be that, do you think that this issue of internet censorship affects Kazakhstan or nearby countries during the time of conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah. Okay. So
invasion.
Remember how?
Sorry.
Yeah. So remember how I said, like, how I mentioned generating ideas? That's that's why that skill is useful, because you want to generate many ideas, and most of them will be crap, and that's fine, because that's how ideas are generated. So what I did, I would just see which things would interest me personally on a personal level, and then I would see how do they link to politics, right? So when I was like at the early stages of my PhD, I would be bothered by the fact that Kazakhstan sometimes shut down the internet, and I was like, the hell is going on, right? And then I just thought of that issue that bothered me personally in a political dimension, and that's how I guess kind of came up with that idea. And I would just talk to many professors to polish it up, to form it into a actual research question. And the reason why I am like stressing that personal link is because your research question has to be somewhat personal, because you will be stuck with that research for years and years to come, And if you're not passionate or excited about it, you will not last, right? And that project will not last. So you have to be mindful of that. So far, what I did for my research, I scraped all of these data, all of the national internet usage data. I have identified the outliers. And what I'm seeing so far is that autocrats with lower state capacity tend to react to these to like mass protests and other challenges to their regime by shutting down the internet, right? Why do they do that? Well, first, at a certain level, they want to get away with some of the repressions that they are conducting when these mass protests happen. Also, they want to discoordinate the opposition, like because mass protests have to be coordinated. And as an autocrat, you don't want that to happen. So you shut down the internet, people no longer can coordinate, right? Yeah, and finally, the reason why they do that is because, they just don't have any other measures, right? I mean, it's not that they want to shut it down. It's just because they couldn't come up with anything else, right? If they were like an awesome, amazing autocrat that, did their homework, they probably wouldn't have let these mass protests to happen in the first place. The fact that we see these mass protests means that they did not do their intelligence work. They do not have support of the elites. They do not have support of the masses, and they do not know what their people want. And so, which is why only mediocre, low capacity autocrats shut down the internet when, faced with these challenges. And that's what we saw in January, basically, right? The government freaked out. They tried using a deep package inspection, couldn't do that. And then they were like, well, we're shutting it down. We're going dark. Now, how much of that can be applied to Russian invasion in Ukraine, right? Many people were concerned. There was even a New York Times article questioning whether, Kazakhstan experience may happen in Ukraine. Well, when it comes to cybersecurity and cyber weaponry, it's somewhat hard to weaponize that in a hot conflict, right? And it's also hard to implement it against Ukraine, right? For several reasons. First, when we're talking cybersecurity, we're talking like things like passwords, hacking energy grids, hacking, people's private information, that type of stuff. Or we're talking trolls, right? Yes, much of cyber insecurity comes from, convincing people on the internet that something is true or something isn't true, right? And that's why you employ like trolls, right? Those two things are hard to implement in Ukraine because first, Ukrainian people are very united right now, and they would not fall for any of the trolls that Russia may send their way, right? So that cyber danger is out of the question. Two, another cyber danger could be, shutting down an electrical grid or, hacking private information, stuff like that. Well, first of all, those things are probably, are much more securely defended, right? Because hackers are also not stupid. They're kind of lazy. They only go for low-hanging fruit, right? And so I don't see a way in which that may happen in Ukraine, right? And let's be honest, Ukrainian people have much more, imminent problems than, their personal information being stolen right now, right? So I don't think that would have any significant or meaningful effect in that sense. And I think we also see that, Russian cyber army is turned out to be kind of a paper tiger, just like the real army and military. So I wouldn't really worry about that. Finally, when we're talking about internet outages, like I said, they only happen in low capacity regimes, which also means that, regimes with fewer internet service providers, right? Kazakhstan has like what, 2 major providers? We have like Kazakhtelecom, and I think that's it, right? The other one is just like a subsidiary or something. Ukraine has more than 300 or 200 internet service providers. Try shutting them all down, right? It's very hard. And also, like, of course, you could brute force it, right? You could make a brute force shutdown. You could shoot up like a server with a missile, right? But Russians don't want to do that either, because if you occupy that territory, you need to hold it down. And if you need to hold it down, you still need that infrastructure, and you don't want to rebuild that infrastructure, right? Which is why I don't really see, a chance of an internet shutdown being weaponized there. What we may see is something like what's going on in Mariupol, right? Where there is no internet, there are no mobile networks. Why? Because the city is surrounded, and they shut down the local networks. But again, can only happen at that tiny regional level. Does that answer your question?
I think it perfectly answers the question. It was very thorough.
Okay.
So, and let's talk about your piece of advice. Can you give any advice on how to keep being motivated during studies for our students? Because we see that it probably takes a lot of motivation and discipline to get there and do the research. I mean, it's very time consuming. So yeah, motivation and discipline. Any advice?
Motivation and discipline. Okay. Well, I don't know how it is now, but when I was at Nazarbayev University, the campus wasn't as good. We didn't have the mega center or whatnot, right? It was not super exciting. I also don't like the campus because it snows a lot. There's no sunshine. Many people would get depressed, right? So I think both as a bachelor student and as a graduate student later, if you choose to become a graduate student later, I think it's important to have a support network. So you want to have friends, and you want to have fun. So I think, weirdly and counterintuitively, my advice for staying motivated and disciplined would be to not forget to have some fun, and just in general try developing healthy habits, healthy coping mechanisms too. I think those things would come handy no matter your career path, whether you do research or whether you just do any other job, right? So yeah, and just remember to take care of yourself, I guess, is an advice that I would give to you and my past self as well. You only have you, and be your own best friend. Okay.
And I think digging deeper into the topic of mental health, let's say, I mean, that would be pretty straightforward question, but do you have times when you feel unmotivated as a part of your procrastination? Do you procrastinate a lot? And when you feel this way, how do you cope with that?
I don't have times when I feel unmotivated. I do have times when I feel motivated. Unmotivated is my status quo. That's how I feel all the time. Okay, I have occasional spikes when I feel motivated. Jokes aside, I think mental health is super important, and if you do have a chance, absolutely take care of it. I know that there's still some stigma, both in Kazakhstan and abroad and in the United States, and I think that there are some positive changes in that sense. So yeah, most definitely take care of your mental health, right? Think of it as going to the gym, right? You don't go to the gym and then you see results immediately, right? Same with your mental health. You don't want to have a crisis and only then refer to a specialist, right? You want to do some preemptive work. Yeah. So just be mindful of that. And whenever I feel unmotivated, I don't know, I guess I am just reminding myself of this question. Like, if I don't do anything now, would things get worse or would things get better? And they probably would get worse, right? So if things are bad and I don't do anything now, I'm not helping anyone. But also at the same time, this is my 6th year. My funding is running out, and there's fire under my feet. So I have to move fast. And if any of that applies to you, use that.
Mm-hmm. Great. So before going into our blitz questions, Wrapping up the overall questions, what are your plans after graduation from the University of Rochester? You're graduating in June, right? So
I'm
do
hoping.
you plan to work in Kazakhstan or abroad?
Yeah, I'm hoping to defend in August, and after that, I mean, I am looking at some postdocs, which is a uh, which is just an opportunity for people to do research. So I'm looking at that. I'm also looking at some industry positions. So, like um, um, data scientist positions in some private companies, some research companies too. Uh, and again, that's something that may interest.
I think your internet is lagging. Let's wait. Nash. Okay, our guest was kicked out. Let's wait until he comes back, okay? Hope you like it so far. Hope it's not taking too much of your time, and he is very, very good, I think. A lot of information. So let's stay until the end. And maybe if you have questions afterwards, that would be great. Oh, reactions, great.
Host seems to be good.
Thank you. Clean.
Well, guys, I just contacted Agabek and he said that he had some problems with his computer.
He's coming
Let's wait.
back. Mhm.
Yeah, let's wait for a couple of minutes.
Joining.
My apologies. Sorry, my computer just died on me.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Everybody waited. I think almost no one left. So yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
what was the question again?
Regarding your future plans.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to defend in August, and right now I'm looking at postdocs in academia, and I'm looking at some data scientist positions in private companies. And I was just talking about there are many different institutions that do research, right? Not just universities. There are like survey companies, think tanks, that type of stuff. So I'm looking at those jobs as well. I am not planning on coming back to Kazakhstan just yet. Yeah, I'd like to I'd like to have some working experience in the US and maybe Europe too. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so now time for Blitz questions. Your top 3 courses at NU, if you remember any.
Top 3.
Mhm. Maybe without any order, specific order.
Yeah. Probably econometrics 1. I don't remember the name of the course, but I really like the federalism course, Russian Federation or Russian Federalism course with Dr. Shank, and the research methods class. Yeah, probably those 3.
Great. Nazarbayev University or the University of Rochester?
What do you mean?
It's just yes or no, just Blitz question. You don't have to explain or say anything.
Okay. Yeah, U of R, I
Yeah,
guess.
it's cruel.
Yeah, University of Rochester. Sorry. Yeah.
Your top 3 professors at NU?
Dr. Shank, Dr. Kobayashi, but I think he left a while ago, and Dr. Trochev, if he's still there. I don't know.
He is. He's the head of her department. Okay.
Okay. Awesome.
I don't know if you will come up with the question with the answer right ahead, but how about, can you suggest 3 books that every political scientist should read?
3 books that every political scientist should read. Give me a second, okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. The Imperative of Integration by Anderson, I think. Censored by Molly Roberts. And Race and Technology by Ruha Benjamin. There you go. Those 3.
Okay, so in the last question, the last Blitz question, your life motto. Do you have one?
I don't think I do, no. No, I don't think so.
Okay,
yeah.
So that's it on my end. That was a very, very good talks. Thank you a lot. And now I think people can finally ask their questions. There are already, I think, questions in the chat. So yeah, I officially announce that this is Q&A session time.
Okay, awesome. Have I considered Europe in my applications, and what's the general attitude towards European universities in the US? I have not considered Europe in my applications, like when I was applying to grad school, primarily because at that point in time, Nazarbayev didn't have many professors with European training. So the whatever advice they were giving us was skewed towards the United States. So right now, if you have any professors who have been trained in Europe, talk to them and get their advice. Also, in general, you want to talk to your professors because they may know more about different schools, right? So those like factors that I have highlighted, like, diversity, completion rate. You can also ask those questions from our professors, right? The general attitude towards European universities, I think in the past, there was some arrogance, let's say, on the behalf of, the United States universities. But more and more these days, we clearly see that there are many amazing European universities that you may want to apply to. And also they have like much better working conditions because they have better health insurance and better labor conditions. So there are many, reasons why you want to go get your, graduate degree in Europe. So by all means. Among my fellows who also are doing PhD in political science, is their background related to politics? Are there any people with different backgrounds or majors? Yes. So that's an awesome question. Yeah, like I said, many schools may not care as much about your political science training. They may care more about your math training. So in my cohort, I believe we had one student who majored in physics. There are also a couple of students in the department who have majored in physics or math. So yes, people come from different backgrounds into political science. People who have majored in economics, may come to political science. But again, depends on the department, right? But like I said, I think the overall trend is that many departments are, doing more and more quantitative stuff, which is why they value, economics training or physics training or, math training, even computer science training. So yeah, backgrounds are pretty diverse. Yeah.
By the way, you can just raise hands, guys, and turn on your microphone and start speaking one-to-one, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah. Or you can just type it in the chat.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask something extra. So, so basically our major is political science and international relations, right? Which is quite not the common thing because these two disciplines are usually like are separate programs. And the same thing goes with master's and PhD usually. And for example, if I want to, for example, do more quant heavy stuff, but I also lean towards IR more. Should I consider, like, is there any program like which focuses on IR and quant heavy? Because many of IR programs that I looked into are mostly like very qualitative, less statistics, and yeah.
Let's see. Well, yeah, I think you may just want to. The thing is, like, the political science department website may not have those exact words. They may not say like, "Hey, we also do international relations," for example, right? But people could still do IR without just calling it IR. Like, they may want to say like, "Hey, I'm interested in conflict," like, or like this professor is interested in conflict, or like, peace studies, and that's also IR, right? And you may want to look into that. Also, be aware that your research interests are subject to change, right? You may think that you like IR right now because, that's your exposure. But once you get into a grad school, chances are it will probably change. You may, become interested in something else, and that's totally fine, right? So what you want to, yes, you want your research interests to be aligned, but also what you want in that school is, good training, good environment, and good people. Okay, so.
And can I ask an extra question if no one?
Yeah, of course.
So it's more related to data. So my interests include Kazakhstan. It includes like being a Central Asian expert, probably in the future. Who knows? Doing basically research on Kazakhstan stuff. However, I also want to do quant heavy stuff. I want to work with data. And the very, very big issue of Kazakhstan is that there is a lack of data, or it might be not credible, not accurate. Have you faced this issue? And for example, when identifying research area interest, what if my interest doesn't have data, or it's extremely hard to work on that topic, especially in the context of Kazakhstan? What do you do when you don't have data? You just create one, or?
Yeah, so I think
probably.
Yeah, so I think it's a blessing in disguise, right? So first of all, you know, if you want to apply to like a Eurasian studies program, right? Many of them may not be as quant heavy, right? But you still can go there and then still like, you know, gain some statistical training from a different department, right? Again, once you get in, you know, there are many opportunities, right? You just need to talk to people and, you know, come up with ideas, not in terms of research, but also in terms of your training, right? It's like I got into political science program, but I also got a data science degree out of nowhere, right? Now, when it comes specifically to the, you know, the research issue of no data, it's a blessing in disguise because yes, you can create data, right? Generally, your contribution to science and research, you know, could be put into one of the three boxes, right? You can come up with a great theory, a great, amazing new data set, or, you know, a immaculate research design. Ideally, you want to do all three, right? Now, with, you know, Kazakhstan, yes, we don't have a much credible data available, right? For many reasons. So you may want to get creative, right? Thankfully, there are things like social media, right? You may want to employ some of that, right? For instance, there's this awesome paper on Belarus protests, right? And this researcher, she looked at the, you know, different cities and different Telegram chats for different cities, right? And she was looking at how they grew before and after those protests, right? Like how did those networks change, right? That data didn't exist, so she just, you know, create some of that data, you know, set up a nice paper, and, you know, got a publication. And you could do a similar thing with Kazakhstan, right? You could use social media. You could use, you know, Kazakhstani newspapers, right? Stuff like that. Just don't let that discourage you. If, you know, if there is no data, it's not only is that an issue, but also it's an opportunity, right? Because you can contribute more. Yeah, just try and be creative. Like I said, much of your you know, work wouldn't be doing math and programming. Much of your work, and, you know, valuable work, is being creative and coming up with ideas and talking to people. So do just that. Yeah, I think I talked way too much.
Oh yeah. So guys, if you have any questions, right, please ask them now, because I think I have to wrap up the talks as well, because we're recording for already 1.5 hours. Okay, and I think if we are done, you might as well like maybe send reactions. Just I hope everybody liked this talks, and the recording will be posted in all of our channels, and you can watch it later on, because there was a lot of useful information. And by any chance, Agabek, will you be able to send the presentation PDF? I think.
Sure. Yeah. Yes, I will send the slide deck, and it will also have my email, so you can always reach out to me by email if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. So let's say bye. Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.